rather than try to review what would be impossible to review in many videos on his work, I'm going to see if I can't, in just maybe a short discussion here, talk about some of the key concepts, maybe as they could be understood to a relatively unfamiliar audience, and just to get a sense of some of his ideas, just a couple of them only, and some of the applicability of how he has created an operative vocabulary for addressing recurrent issues and themes within communication and in interaction. Now, one of the concepts that he uses is a distinction between what could be called information theory and communication theory. Now again, this will get a little complicated, and if you need to, you may have to pull out a notebook right now and pause the video, get out a notebook and take some notes as this is going on, and maybe pause it as you need to. But he suggests that there is a kind of information theory, and information theory is the subset of communication theory. So communication theory is sort of goes over information theory. Information theory is entailed within it. And the simplest way to define the distinction between these is a distinction between data and capta. Now, data is what information theory deals with, and the way it gets its data is from creating contexts of choice. So take a true-false test. You say, is it true or is it false? Now, when you construct this either-or context that gives a choice, you give as meaningful data within that information theoretic model, right? There's lots of different multiple choice tests, could be that, true-false examples of that, either-or logics. But now, those are actually a subset within communication. Communication is a much larger issue. It addresses and includes all information theoretic problems. Now certainly communication theorists and the communication theory has to deal with information theory, the problem of data, and with various contexts of choice and how those give meaningful information by way of data. But you have to look at communication, because communication itself is a larger problem where you include what he would describe as the choice of context. So rather than just a context of choice, you also include the choice of context, and that's partly because at the communication level you have an interaction that you have capta rather than data. It's what's taken as meaningful rather than what's given as meaningful, and it includes the possibility of people to recontextualize the frame that was being forced in the information theoretic model. Right? There's lots of cases of this. I mean, if someone says and tries to railroad somebody, true or false, have you stopped beating your spouse? When someone says that, so just answer the question, they force it into a information theoretic model by denying people an ability to recontextualize that. Again, it's oftentimes an unfair technique, but we often talk about, it's very useful in certain applications in mathematics and in science and in technology, but when we want to deal with human communication, we have to see that it's more than just the creation of data in various ways of constructing context of choice. What we need to see is, again, this notion of this choice of context. Right? If you give a true-false test that includes if false, rewrite it to make it true, you're moving more toward a communication theoretic model than just an information theoretic model. Now, another distinction that I think YouTubers, at least, might find interesting in the work of Richard Lanigan, and again, I'm trying to just talk about a couple of really interesting ideas from his book, Human Science of Communicology and Phenomenology of Communication. I'll also put together a link for some of the resources for the ICI there. But one of the distinctions that he makes that's very interesting is the distinction between what he would call speech speaking and speech spoken. And he traces this back, I believe, to Merleau-Ponty. And the distinction roughly could be said, if you try to think about maybe the difference between using thought in an original, actual, accomplishing way, as opposed to recalling thought already accomplished and sort of recirculating that. Try to think of the difference, say, between, okay, so speech speaking is the actual eventful productive moment of discourse where you concretize in an original articulation in a spontaneous way the actual thought, and then later, like I think this happens to people, right? That's the speech speaking. And then later you go back and you go repeat and you say, oh, here's a thought I had, and then you go repeat that. That's a kind of speech spoken. It's a recalling and recollection of an already crystallized thought. And both of those dynamics are happening as we think about things and as we speak with one another. We're varying between speech speaking and speech spoken, and it's very interesting to look at that. Some YouTubers, they come on and they post one video, and what they want is a different audience for the same video. It's kind of like a stand-up comic who's worked up a bit and then takes it around the country, right? They have the same bit and then they just want a different audience. That's different than, say, someone who's a regular, quotes, YouTuber who's there imagining the same audience day in, day out, and is trying to come up with fresh stuff every day to have engagement for those people. I think in those cases you see much more active, what I believe Professor Lanigan would call speech speaking. Right, it's more like the disc jockey who has a regular audience and each morning has to be witty or funny. So I don't really have too much time. I guess I would just like to wrap up and suggest, if you haven't looked at some of this, again, for people who are familiar with semiotics and phenomenology, it's an amazing synthesis that Lanigan has put together here. I do think his work is very sophisticated and complex. I think it would demand much more than could be done in a video here. So I think it's better to just talk about those two ideas, and hopefully that will in itself just encourage people to go check out those books. Okay, thanks.